Hey everybody, my name is Dowden, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to make music in the style of Camelphat. In the last little while, Camelphat has been topping the charts with countless tracks, so I wanted to give you my take on how to make their music. They're a combination of more techie-oriented house music and a little bit more progressive house music that combines to make a really melodic style that is really great for clubs, really great for festivals, and it was a lot of fun to make. To sound like Camelphat, you have to have really nice, techie, full-sounding, bright drums that sound like this. A big, full, harmonic sounding bass that sounds like this. And big, rich melodies and pads that are filling up the rest of the spectrum to give you a complete, full sounding track, and they sound like this. So we're gonna jump in, but before we do, make sure to go hit that subscribe button with notifications on so you get more videos like this one. And if you'd like to download the project files, make sure to click the link in the description below. The project will work in versions of Ableton 10 and up. Okay, so we're gonna get started. I'm gonna start with the kick drum first, and the kick drum I'm going to use is in one of my sample packs. I'm gonna put the track in A sharp. So I'm going to grab my kick that's in G sharp because it's a little bit better for this style. The kick that I want is not too punchy, but punchy enough that it's going to push through that really thick bass that we're going to be using, but I don't want it super sub heavy, just enough that we can really control the sub as well as the high end. So I'm going to actually just make it an audio track. Rename this to kick. And of course, just every quarter note. We'll just keep it this long for now, and I'll turn my loop on. The kick does lack a little bit of low end, so I'm going to just grab a Dynamics. Multi-band Dynamics, just boost the low end a little bit. By 2 dB, and that should be it. It's a little loud, so I'm going to bring it down. I'm actually going to bring most of the channels down. I'm going to throw just a limiter on the master. The reason I do this is so that I can boost the gain a little bit without really clipping and control the rest of the volumes of my track and bring them down a little bit without it actually losing too much volume overall in the master. So I'll just put about 3 or 4 dB right now and bring this down to about -6. I have a little bit more headroom to play with. Next, I'm going to grab a tom, and I'm going to get this like nice rolling rhythm, like a boom, ba-dum, boom, boom, ba-dum, boom. And that's really common in the Camelphat tracks. Usually it's pretty subtle. It's just kind of like a background almost, this background noise to get a little bit more of a groove going. So I'm going to grab this one here. And I'm going to take the bass frequencies mostly out of it. And just a 16ths. And grab another one, put it here. Perfect. Make this a little bit shorter and fade it out a little bit, consolidate it, and then replace the first one. Awesome. And I'm just going to duplicate that over a bunch of times. And then I'm going to EQ out that low end. I don't want that low end. Don't want that bass interfering with my sub or the bass line that I have. But I want that groove a little bit, and I'm going to bring that down quite a bit in volume. Just very subtly in the background, kind of giving us that rhythm, and maybe taking a little bit off the high end as well. Cool. All right, next I'm going to add a shaker. I'm going to insert a drum rack. Drag and drop the drum rack in there. I'm just going to reduplicate these over. I'm going to name this one shaker, and I'm going to turn all these yellow for now. And draw in my MIDI clip. And I'm going to drag in a hat. So I've already chosen most of the hats here to save some time. Instead of going through and auditioning all the different samples, I will show you what they sound like and show you how I program them. So take the low end of that. I don't need the low end. It's a little bit longer actually, and consolidate. So what I'm looking to do is get this nice 16th rhythm going. So super simple, turn this into 16ths, and we can draw them out. But before I keep going along, I want to change the velocities of these. A really common velocity pattern is to have this one pretty quiet, next one a little bit louder, maybe halfway. The loudest one is the third one, and then back down to around the same spot as the second one. So it's like low, medium, high, medium. And this is a really, really popular 16th pattern, but I also want to make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to move some of these over. So I'll duplicate these over. You know what, let's do 2 more. So now we have right, but I want to change these a little bit more. Maybe I want to move this one over a little bit, make it more interesting. Keep going over, changing these just slightly to make it a little bit more realistic sounding, a little bit more humanized. And last, I'm going to grab a velocity tool and throw some random velocity on there. So I'm going to just turn up the random to about 10. And now we're just going to have a little bit of varying velocity in this shaker loop as well. Perfect. Duplicate that over. I want to add a second shaker. A lot of these drums are very organic sounding, and there's a lot of little things going on in the background that make them feel really alive and really interesting. So I'm going to add a second shaker. Grab this one here, throw it in there. And I'm just going to copy and duplicate up the hats with the different velocities and stuff to save time, and then I can go in and adjust it even further if I'd like. Change some of these as well. There we go. Duplicate that over. Now we have 2 shakers. But I want to make the second one even more interesting, so I'm going to actually add a little bit more to it. So I'm going to go in here, open up my chains, and turn on the volume of the second one quite a bit. And then I'm going to add a vocoder onto it. And I love doing this in a lot of my tracks. It really, really helps fill out the spectrum of that hi-hat and make it feel a lot more loose and less, less chunky and chuggy, and more organic and realistic sounding. And it really, really helps kind of spread out the sound and make it more interesting. So I'm going to put the dry wet, keep it at 100%. I don't even need to really touch the filter because I want some of the low end, maybe just a tiny bit of the low end out. And then I'm going to increase the release to about 300-ish. And let's take a listen. You hear how much louder it feels now, so I'm going to turn this down even more. It's almost like a reverb, like it just has a little bit of tail, and it makes it sound much more full. At the end of this track, when there's a lot more information happening, there's a lot more things going on, this is not going to feel so obvious, but it is going to help keep a little bit more of that, top end a little bit spread out. So then I'm going to add this really cool LFO trick that I like to do. So I'm going to grab an LFO. It's a Max for Live device. If you don't have it, you can automate it. It's a free LFO. It's a free Max for Live device, but if you don't have Max for Live, you can just bypass this, or you can automate this as well. So I'm going to map this to number 3 on the onto the frequency. You're going to see that it's jumping back and forth like this. Turn the amount up. That's a little bit less. Maybe on there. Maybe this one down a little bit. I don't need to go all the way to the top. And slow the rate down. See how it's moving back and forth. I want to, maybe a little bit faster. I want to make it so that it's always changing. That 16th hat is always changing. It's always doing something different. So I'm going to just boost this up just slightly and give it kind of like a little resonant boost. Maybe 3 dB. And now that hat is going to sound different all the time. It's a little bit obvious, so I'm going to take it down a little bit. Just something to give it a little bit extra, organic and realistic feel. Okay, moving on to the open hat. So I'm going to rename this one to open hat, and let's go ahead and grab our open hat. I'm going to layer up 3 different hats here. So we're going to do hi-hat feel. I'm going to drag and drop that into our first pad here. I'm going to open up the chains. I'm going to duplicate the feel. And then I'm going to grab hi-hat polo. And I'm going to drag and drop that in. I'm going to bring this one up actually. So with choosing these open hats, you want to be choosing ones that are filling up a lot of the spectrum. Usually a lot of Camelphat's tracks have these really big open hats. Sometimes they're a little bit more shrill, a little bit more high end, a little bit sharper. Sometimes they're a little bit more midsection. So it really depends on the track, but grabbing these big full hats is sometimes tricky because you don't want to grab one that's too punchy or, you know, too short, but you also don't want to grab ones that are too expressive and too long. So finding a nice medium I find is the best bet. And sometimes they're a bit too punchy, but then you have to control the dynamics, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to take this first hat here. I want it to be nice and wide. So I'm going to add a stereo delay on there. Grab the delay, throw it on there. I'm going to turn this from sync all the way down to 0, dry wet to 100%, and feedback to 0. This is going to create a stereo delay or the Haas effect. Turn off the chains so that they're not the same. And turn this down to about 20 milliseconds, I think would be a good spot for this. Maybe a little bit higher, we'll see. Take a listen now. Yeah, nice and wide, really, really wide, especially if you're on headphones. Great. Cut out the low end. Next, I'm gonna go into the polo, and I want this one to be more centered in the mix because I already have one that's really wide. I'm not gonna touch the stereo image of this one. It already comes right down the center of the mix, so I'm going to leave that so we have one hat that is wide and one that is centered, and it's going to give us best of both worlds. We're going to have the nice mono signal or the center of the mix and then the width as well. So if we do end up losing that width for whatever reason, if we get down mixed to mono or if we're listening on a cell phone or something, then you have the mid hat still that's going to punch through the mix. So I'm going to just leave that as it is. And we have the EQ covering that. And I'm going to go into the last hat, which is just this first hat duplicated. I'm going to cut out the bottom of it. So I'm going to, or bring out the first half, maybe to about there. And I'm going to fade it in, about 50 milliseconds, and we can take a listen to that. It's more of like a softer, gradual transient now. It's not so aggressive. And I'm going to create this nice swinging effect with this. So I'm going to draw in the MIDI. And I'm going to change my ins and outs here. So I click on this I-O, it's going to show me where the receives are. So because this is a duplicate, the receive is also C1. So when I play C1 in here, it's going to play both hats. But I don't want that. I want this one to be played at the same time so that when I hit that C1, it's going to play the wide hat and the mid hat. Then I want to change this one here so that it's C sharp, so it's a different key. And then I'm going to add this swinging effect. I'm going to do 16ths, and I'm going to go on the offbeat here. Pretty simple. Let me make the loop a little bit smaller. I'm going to put this second hat right after the first hat, the one with the slightly gradual attack. And I'm going to change the velocities of it. So that the first one's a little bit quieter, maybe the second one's a little bit louder, this one's like this, and sure, just making it all different. And let's take a listen. Just gives it a little bit more groove, a little bit more swing, and it's very subtle. Last, I'm going to actually compress this hat because it is a little bit punchy. I'm going to grab this compressor. I'm really going to squash the transients of this. I'm going to put 0 attack, and I'm just going to grab the really, really big peak, the really big attack. I'm just going to squish the dynamics. I want that hat nice and full sounding, nice and forward. And it is just a bit too punchy for me, so I'm going to just reduce and pull that back up. Perfect. Last but not least, maybe I'll throw some auto pan on there, just to give it a little bit more movement, just very slightly. And then I'm going to go back into my shakers, and actually I'm going to use some sidechain compression from the open hat. So when the shakers are playing, this open hat is going to come in, and it's going to turn down the shakers just slightly so that the open hat has a little bit more room to punch through the mix. Just very slightly. And I'm going to put my shaker up just a little bit, and my open hat I'm going to bring down as well. Next, I'm going to move into a wide hat again. I'm going to make it even wider and add a little bit more character to the hat. And I'm going to use this Club Sizzle Brushed Close. I'm going to drag that into the drum rack. And all these samples are going to be included in the project file. So if you want to grab the project file, make sure to check the description below, or make sure to click the link in the top right corner. I'm going to duplicate this hat over a few times, and let's move on to the hat wide. This hat is going to be more of a background kind of washing effect. And I'm going to create my MIDI track here. And I'm just going to grab 16th notes and just draw them in like this. I'm going to turn down the velocity of this one quite a bit, and this one quite a bit, and this one about halfway, maybe this one up a little bit more. And I'm just going to duplicate this over. And let's listen to how it sounds. I'm going to take out that low end. And then I'm going to do a pretty big reverb on this. So I'm just going to grab a stock reverb, throw it on there. And we're going to go about 60-ish, maybe 65, dry wet, and the decay about 2-ish seconds. Let's go 2.2 seconds. It's like that really nice background washed out sound. Then the last thing I'm going to do is grab a compressor and sidechain compress from the open hat. And that's going to give us that really nice kind of pumping effect of that hat as well. Really want to be trying to fill in this upper spectrum. So because there's so much in the top of these Camelphat tracks, they really fill out the top end and make it sound so full and white noisy and just so glimmery and shiny. So I'm really trying to fill up that spectrum here. And let's take it from the open hat and really squish this down. Great. Hear that with the rest of the drums. I want to change the pitch of this a little bit. I'm going to go to the open hat and change the transposition of these hats by 2 here. Just down 2 notes, 2 semitones. I feel like it fits the track a little bit better with that pitch. Next, we're moving on to the clap. I'm going to change the color of this to orange. And then I'm going to draw in a MIDI track. This is orange, and let's go ahead and grab our clap. Well, I'm just using one clap for this, and it is called Clap Fank Toy. I want a hat that's not too crunchy, not too big, but has enough punch to really hold its own on top of that kick. So this one sounds pretty good. I'm going to shorten the tail just a little bit. A little bit longer. And of course, I'm going to cut out that low end. And that's really it for the clap. Draw in the MIDI clip. Taking a little bit more of that bite. Great. I'm going to turn the tom down a little bit as well. A little bit loud for me. Now we can do the final drum, which is going to be the ride cymbal. And again, we are adding just a ton of this really nice high end to the sound. This is going to be more like a techno style repeating ride loop. And I'll show you how we can make that. So I'm going to grab my ride cymbal. I'm just going to grab a 909, the classic 909 ride. Drag and drop that in. EQ at the low end, of course, and then I'm going to draw in my MIDI information. So I'm going to go in 16th notes. I'm going to draw one on the kick and then on the offbeat as well. Duplicate that over. It's pretty loud, so I'm just going to turn it down a little bit. It's hitting on every note, but it's obviously pretty aggressive and distracting. So I'm going to just soften this up a little bit with an echo. And this is going to make it sound really nice and wide, really nice and moving. And change this down to, let's go to 1/32, so 30-second notes. Bring it down to about 20% dry wet. Maybe push the stereo up a little bit, nice and wide. And then I'm also going to do compression on this as well. And this is where this loop really comes to life. Draw the compressor in And I'm going to drag this down quite a bit and change this to kick. So every time the kick plays, it's going to pump that volume down. It's going to compress that, and it's going to make it sound really, really nice and moving. Let's do that with everything else. We turn it down just a little bit because we are clipping. Turn this down a little bit. Now you can hear how that ride is really filling up that empty space. I'm going to bring that over to this section over here. We're going to use that a little bit later in the track. I'm going to bring the open hat up a little bit. It's going to bring the volume of this hat wide up quite a bit inside the envelope here because it's really quiet, and I'm just going to increase the decay time a little bit. So I'm going to move on to the bass element. I'm going to insert MIDI track, and I'm going to bring in a wavetable. So the Camelphat style basses are going to be really full sounding. They have a lot of harmonic tone to them. They are really filling up that low end quite nicely, and it's usually pretty warm. So I'm going to bring this up to a sawtooth wave. I'm going to also turn on the sub and bring that up to about -2. And so now we're going to have the sawtooth wave, but we're also going to make sure that we have a nice clean sub at the bottom of that bass line. I'm going to bring the frequency down almost all the way, maybe to about 40. And I'm going to turn this to a 24 instead of a 12. I'm going to turn on oscillator 2, and I'm going to just have a little bit of volume coming in. So bring this down maybe about there, and putting this up to 24. So it's going to be 2 whole octaves above that, and also change this so it's sawtooth wave. Before I go any further, let me just draw in the MIDI so we can actually hear what's going on. So I'm going to actually draw this in, and I'm going to make this quite a bit longer and make the loop longer, which means I have to duplicate these over as well. Okay, so because the track I want to write is in A sharp, I'm going to start at the A sharp, but I'm going to go pretty low here. A sharp here. I'm going to go for a count of 4, going over to the G sharp, over to the F sharp, and then finally the D sharp. A lot of the Camelphat tracks have these quick little 16th notes that introduce the next part of the bass line. So we're going to do that as well. I'm just going to drag this back a little bit, just enough room that we can fit in 2 more notes. And go like this, a little longer, and then up to the G sharp again, and then back down to the D. It's going to give it a little bit more fun, a little bit more swing, and keep it a little bit more interesting. Okay, let's go back and change our wavetable to sound more like an actual Camelphat bass. So right now it just sounds like mostly just a sub because we don't have any of that filter opening. So I'm going to go into my envelope 2, and I'm going to increase that decay to about, I don't know, 3 or 4 seconds. We want this really nice, long, decayed bass. We want it to slowly decay, but to give it a bit of punch, but not so much that it's going to be more of a pluck. Bring the sustain, keep it around there, and release will bring maybe 300 or 400 milliseconds. I go to the amplitude and make sure that the amplitude's good as well. Maybe the decay up as well, a couple seconds. Sustain I'll bring up almost all the way. And then release I will definitely put up quite a lot as well. We want these long sustained notes. And then I'm going to go into the matrix, and this is where the magic's going to happen. So I'm going to click on my frequency here, and I'm going to turn on envelope 2 and start to bring that up. So now you can really hear that harmonic content coming through from the sawtooth wave. So I just realized that I actually didn't make the right length of the bass notes. So I'm going to actually just duplicate the length of all these. Okay, so now we want to make this bass sound really, really wide and really, really interesting. So I'm going to turn on the unison. I'm going to bring those voices up to at least 4 or 5, and the amount can stay at around 30%. And listen to what a difference this makes. Maybe turn the sub volume down just a little bit. Adds a huge width to it. It sounds really interesting and a little bit detuned, and it just gives it so much character. Turn my loop off here. Last, what I want to do to make this even more interesting is throw an LFO onto the cutoff so that it's slightly moving back and forth at all times. I'm going to bring this amount down pretty low, maybe 15–20%. And I'm going to turn the speed down just a little bit. Back to the matrix and turn that LFO 1 onto the filter just slightly. You can see it moving here. So a little bit, maybe a little bit more. There we go. I'm going to add some saturation on there and really bring out those crispier highs and mids. Put a saturator on, and let's boost this up. Maybe 60 dB, and then we'll bring down the output. Throw some EQ on there. So we have this EQ. I want to take out the side frequencies of the low end. So when you're dealing with unison and detuning and making these sounds really wide, sometimes we can get phase cancellation because of the low end of the mix. So I'm going to turn this into a mid-side EQ, go to my side, and just remove all that low end from the sides of that image, that stereo image. So now I don't have anything below 250, around there, in the sides of the speakers, the sides of the mix, and it's going to help alleviate or eliminate that phase cancellation we might run into. Then I can boost the high up a little bit. Then go back to the mids. Maybe take a little bit out of this section here. Maybe roll off a little bit over here. Last but not least, we have to sidechain our kick so that it is pushing down when it's playing. Just giving us that extra little bit of room so the kick can punch through. Awesome. Sounds a little bit too crunchy in my opinion, so great. Moving on to our first rhythmic section of our synths, and that is just going to be called rhythm lead. And this is going to be more like a pluck that's going to fill up some of the spectrum as well. So I'm going to grab this rhythm lead. I'm going to grab another wavetable. I'm going to change this to a square wave at the top. And I'm going to bring that volume down really low, like minus 18. That's really low, but that is where I want to go. I want to bring this up positive 24 semitones. Turn on the oscillator 2. I'll also bring this up to about between a square and a saw. I'm going to keep the filter at 24. And I'm also going to turn on this filter and put that to 12. I'm going to bring this frequency down to about 1,000. And this frequency I'll keep up to around 200. Now that I have the sound kind of started, I'm just going to draw out the MIDI. So I'm going to grab this from here, Control-Shift-M or Command-Shift-M if you're on Mac, I believe. And let's draw out this MIDI. So I want this MIDI to be, I got this from one of their tracks, this idea where this pluck is just kind of always rolling and creating this like tension and this texture, and it fills up a lot of the empty space that's kind of missing from a melodic section. Let's draw in the MIDI information. So I'm going to go down to a sharp 1, and I'm going to start a 16th note in, and then go an 8th note in between, and then an 8th note in between, and just keep following that formula of an 8th note in between. It's a kind of a weird pattern, but it is really, really tension inducing, and it's a really nice pattern. So let's listen now. Great, now we're gonna turn this into an actual pluck. We're gonna go to the amplitude envelope. I'm gonna bring the attack down to 0. Decay, I'll leave around now 5 or 600 is fine. And then I'm gonna go to sustain, bring it all the way down. Release, I can leave at 600, it's fine. Envelope 2, I'm going to bring this attack down to 0 again. Decay a little bit faster, around 250. Sustain all the way down and release also a little bit faster. Then I'm gonna go into the matrix and I'm going to bring that frequency 1 up on envelope 2. One nice punchy pluck. Now you bring this up 1 octave. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna take that low end out. Let's volume up a little bit. And let's grab a saturator, of course. And then, of course, delay and reverb. So I'm gonna grab delay, throw it on there, and a reverb. Awesome. So I'll turn the reverb off for now, keep the delay, and I'm going to put this one at 3 and 5 to give it even more movement. Keep the feedback up a little bit, not too much because I don't want it interfering. And the dry wet is about 20-ish%. Gives us that nice movement and rhythm. And then the reverb as well, of course, I'm going to have on. And I'm going to bring it up to maybe 20-ish%. A little bit of pre-delay. Nice, maybe a little bit less dry wet. Great, here the rest of the track. Nice, adds that really nice richness to the melody and gives us a bit of driving energy as well. So moving on to the ARP, and then we have just the ARP and 2 more elements that are really going to bring this track to life. So I'm going to just duplicate actually this rhythm lead, and let's draw in the MIDI information first. So I'll get rid of all this, and I'm going to draw up an ascending arpeggio. So I'm going to start at the A sharp 1, and I'm just going to draw 16th notes in. I'm just going to go up the scale. So A sharp, the C, D sharp, F flat or E sharp, and then the F, and then just repeat that over and over again. It's a nice repeating, uplifting scale, and we'll just make it this long. I'm only going to have it at the second portion. That's going to be part of the arrangement, but let's take a listen to how that sounds. Really nice and happy sounding, really fun, and it's going to add a lot of melody to the track. That's really going to keep it even more driving and more interesting. It is a little bit aggressive. I'm going to change it just slightly. I'm going to bring this oscillator 2 down. I'm actually going to turn off oscillator 1. I just want the oscillator 2. And then I'm going to also, let me take the filter of this one up a little bit. And we'll bring this one down a little bit. And I'm going to turn on the automation for this, and I'll come back to that. Bring this to about 200 on the frequency. Okay, I'm going to take this up to positive 24 semitones. Let's take a listen. And I'm going to automate that to rise. We'll come back to that after when we're kind of doing the final arrangement. And let's just, you know what, let's stick the LFO in there as well, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Cool, awesome. And a little bit less high end as well. There's a lot going on in the high end, so we can afford it. Yeah, I don't need this compressor on there, just take that off. Now I'm gonna move on to this vocal pad that I did. It's a vocal sample. I'm just gonna drag and drop that into a new audio clip. And what Camelphat does in a lot of their tracks is really cool. They create these rhythms with vocals, and they have it pretty subtle in the background a lot of the time, but it adds so much depth to the track. So once this track is all done, you're gonna see how much of a difference these rhythms here and the vocal pad and the last pad that I'm gonna do, you're gonna see how much of a difference they make in the fullness and richness of the track. So I have the ah here, this is all it sounds like. I turn it up a little bit. I'm just gonna put it on every second quarter note, just like that. Great, so now it doesn't sound very interesting so far, but I'm going to throw on my favorite preset of a filter delay, and that's Wanderer. And right away, it's gonna sound way more interesting. Has rhythm, it has depth and space and width. It's just amazing. I use it on so many of my tracks because it's just so great. I'm gonna grab a saturator, Be a lot of processing on this. I'm using the saturator to bring out even more harmonic content of the sound. Maybe turn it down a little bit. Definitely turn it down here. Next, I'm going to use a limiter, and I'm just going to really bring up all the little nuances and stuff from the sound. So I'm going to bring the ceiling down. That's just really squishing the sound together, like you're really compressing it, so that I get all these little weird nuances in the vocal, and it just makes it feel more like a solid sound. And then I'm going to add a big reverb on there, of course. So let's do a low cut. I don't want that low information, and I'm just going to do a really big reverb. 100% dry wet. Decay doesn't need to be too long because we have quite a bit of delay on it, but there we go. Let's take a listen. A little bit less dry wet. Some EQ at the end of everything to tighten it up and clean it up. And then last but not least, I like to add an auto filter to give it some movement. I'll bring this down just a little bit, amount, and pretty slow rate, I guess, or pretty fast. We'll do a pretty fast rate and the amount. I'll do 12. That's just going to give it a little bit more movement, filtering the high end in and out a little bit. And let's listen with the rest of the track. Much of a difference it makes with that vocal. It adds such a nice texture and glues everything together, and it's just really a really neat trick. Moving on to the final element that we're bringing in, and that is going to be a pigments pad. So I love pigments. I use it in almost probably every one of my tracks. If you don't have pigments, don't worry. I will include a bounced out version of this pad in the project files as well. So if you want to grab those, you will have access to this pad. If you do have pigments, you can use the same preset. And if you don't want to do either, you can just use your own pad as well. Go to the vocal, and I'm going to choose chamber choir. This is a really nice pad. And I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm going to draw out MIDI. I'm going to keep it at the length of the entire track here. Actually going to go twice as long because I know it'll actually be that long when we're done. And let's go pink for pad. Makes sense to me. And I'm just going to go into the A sharp. Look, this little legato button is going to bring it all the way to the end. Good little tip if you didn't know. And I'll do that one more time here. So A sharp, legato, bring it all the way to the end. Let's take a listen to that pad. It's a little low. I'm going to drag that up an octave and turn the volume down quite a bit. Again, really filling up that spectrum, giving it that nice layer of just filler of melodic elements. There's movement. There is just, it's so interesting, and subconsciously it just keeps you engaged and listening. Okay, so now we're going to do just a really quick arrangement. We're going to keep this nice and simple. I'm just going to pretty much duplicate everything over for now. And I'm going to bring in these ride cymbals over here, maybe a little bit later. Duplicate everything over one more time. Actually get rid of these ride cymbals for here, get rid of this, get rid of this, move this over here, get that over a few times, and let's change the automation. So the automation is going to come in, and it's going to slowly rise up to maybe about here, and the rest can just get deleted. Boop, 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 boop. Great, so that pluck ARP is going to come up in movement. Bring this down, maybe level 200 started at. Okay, and then I'm gonna bring my rides in over maybe here. Okay, and that's actually pretty much it for the arrangement. Nice and simple. I'm not going to do a big breakdown or anything. I just wanted to get the bulk of the track. The main ideas behind this track that are so important to take away are these drums, how wide they are, how full they are, how much movement they have, and then the pads and how much these little nuances of the melody make a huge difference. How, you know, the track sounds so different without this melodic element right here. Right, like it adds so much depth and so much flavor to the track, and it's just really bringing out the main elements of the track. It feels more glued together and cohesive. Yeah, I'm just gonna add a bit of filtering into this as well to bring the pad up a little bit slower. So start out here, and by here we'll bring in the pad. And maybe I'll take the low end up a little bit. I don't need that low end of the pad. And the same thing is going to go for this, this rhythm pluck as well. I'm going to filter that in as well. And we'll actually use automation in here. I'll grab this, show automation. And 1000, right? Throw a tiny bit of saturation on the drums overall, and a little bit of reverb as well, just to make the a little bit closer together. The saturation is going to bring out a little bit of the crispiness, and usually I would do this on a return track, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to throw it over the whole drum bus. Guys, if you learned something from this video, before we listen, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I put out more videos like this all the time, and you're going to learn much more about music production, and make sure to grab the project files as well. Okay, let's take a listen. My take on Camelphat. All right, everybody, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. Please let me know in the comments which artists you'd like me to cover next. And if you like this video, please also let me know by giving me a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. I will see you in the next video.